Josh's car pulled up to the curb in front of his house and he leaned back, grinning as he turned off the engine. Today, luck seemed to be on his side. He'd won the office raffle, earning him an early Friday release. With the whole afternoon and the weekend stretched out before him, Josh felt like he'd hit the jackpot. As he reached for his briefcase on the passenger seat, Josh noticed an unfamiliar car parked near his house. It was a sleek silver sedan polished to a gleam. He squinted at it briefly but shrugged it off. People often parked on the street and his mind was focused on surprising his wife, Angela. Normally, he'd walk in around dinner time, but today he'd catch her in the middle of her day. Opening the front door, Josh called out with a cheerful, "Honey, I'm home. Where are you?" The house was unusually quiet. Then he heard Angela's voice, but what he thought he heard made him pause in the entryway. "Stop coming." It was Angela's voice, but her words were strange, garbled almost, and Josh found himself frozen, unsure if he'd heard correctly. His heart beat a little faster, a pulse of anxiety creeping in. He cleared his throat, calling again. "Angela? What was that?" A second later, Angela's voice responded, louder this time. "Oh, stop talking and come in. I'm in the bedroom, everything's fine." Josh frowned, a hint of confusion twisting his smile. He took the stairs 2 at a time, chuckling to himself. Maybe she was on the phone with someone, but it still seemed odd. As he reached the bedroom door, he saw Angela sitting up in bed, smoothing her hair back with a smile. But there was something about her, the way her cheeks were flushed, her clothes a little wrinkled, that made Josh hesitate. "Angela," he started slowly, "I could have sworn I heard you say, 'Stop coming,' not 'stop talking and come in.' What was that about?" Angela let out a little laugh, though Josh couldn't help but notice it sounded forced, maybe even nervous. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Josh, you probably just misheard," she said with a shrug. "I was chatting with Sarah and things got jumbled. You know how it is." Josh nodded, though a sliver of doubt lingered. He was a trusting husband, but today he'd come home to something unexpected. Josh looked at Angela, his brow furrowing. "Honey, whose car is that parked out front near the house?" Angela's eyes widened slightly before a bright smile spread across her face and she gestured toward the window. "Oh, that's David's car, Lisa's husband. I completely forgot to tell you. He bought it recently and stopped by to show us. Isn't it great?" Lisa was Angela's sister and Josh knew David. Josh blinked, surprised. "David's here? Why didn't you call me?" Angela's fingers fluttered as she continued. "Well, it all happened quickly. He was nearby for work and thought, why not drop by for a visit? So we were chatting and I sent him off to grab some coffee and sweets, maybe some chocolate donuts or those croissants from the cafe down the street. And he mentioned maybe we should all get together tomorrow for a barbecue." Josh scratched his head, still a bit thrown. Just as he opened his mouth to respond, the doorbell rang. Angela perked up. "Oh, that must be him." She glanced at Josh and gave a quick wink. Perfect timing, right? Josh followed Angela downstairs, a strange feeling settling in his stomach. When she swung open the door, there stood David, looking a little too casual. His shirt was slightly untucked, his hair tousled in a way that didn't quite look intentional. He greeted Josh with a sheepish grin, his tone overly friendly. "Oh, hey Josh. Great to see you, man. Glad you're back early." Before Josh could answer, Angela chimed in quickly, her tone overly enthusiastic. "David, did you get the coffee and the pastries?" David gave a half-hearted laugh, scratching his neck. Yeah, about that. I got a little lost on the way. I'm not too familiar with this area." Angela raised her eyebrows. A forced smile plastered across her face as she reached out, almost ushering him into the house. "Oh, David, it's just down the street. I told you exactly where it is." She gestured for them both to sit at the kitchen table. "You boys get comfy. I'll show David the way there myself." "Josh, do you want something specific?" Josh, now thoroughly bewildered by the whirlwind of explanations, nodded slowly. "Sure, a large coffee and a croissant with custard would be great." Angela smiled, patting Josh's shoulder before disappearing into the other room to change her clothes. Meanwhile, Josh turned to David, watching as he fidgeted in his seat. "So, David, Josh said, trying to keep his tone casual, what about the barbecue? David's eyes widened, a hint of panic flashing across his face. Oh, a barbecue? When is a barbecue? Josh noticed the ridiculous response, but continued talking. Angela mentioned you wanted us to have a barbecue tomorrow. Some family time, right? David paused for a second, then answered. Yeah, a barbecue, that's exactly what I meant. Yeah, it'd be great for everyone to, catch up and hang out. Great idea. Josh's eyes narrowed. Angela's story and David's reaction felt off. Something wasn't adding up. But before he could press further, David scrambled to pull out his phone. Actually, why don't I call Lisa right now? I'll let her know we're all set for tomorrow. He tapped a few buttons on his phone, glancing nervously at Josh as the line connected. Soon, Lisa's voice came through the speaker, a bit surprised. David? Everything okay? David forced a chuckle, holding the phone up for Josh to see as he switched to video call. Lisa, I'm here with Josh and Angela. Just talking about the barbecue we're having tomorrow. Say hi to Josh. Josh offered a small wave, trying to ignore the tightening feeling in his chest. David was acting open, friendly, and maybe even overly eager, showing Lisa the room and introducing Josh over the call. But something felt out of place, like David was trying to prove something. After a bit more stilted small talk, David ended the call, shoving his phone back in his pocket with a quick exhale. Josh leaned back, crossing his arms. He couldn't shake the feeling that this story, Angela's tale about coffee and donuts, David's nervous enthusiasm about a barbecue, had layers that weren't adding up. Angela reappeared, purse slung over her shoulder. All right, David, she said, sounding almost too cheerful, ready to try again to find cafe. David jumped up, nodding. Right, let's go. He smiled at Josh, but his eyes looked tense. See you soon, Josh. We'll be back with treats. As Angela and David stepped out, Josh sat alone in the quiet house, puzzling over the afternoon's strange series of events. Before you find out what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The second Angela and David were out of the house, Josh made his way back up the stairs. Josh didn't find anything suspicious. Josh moved toward the window, noting how it was slightly ajar, letting in a crisp afternoon breeze. An idea sparked in his mind. What if David had been here, right in this room, and climbed out when Josh arrived? It sounded ridiculous, but stranger things had happened. Peering outside, Josh noticed how the lower roof of the garage was just a short drop down. It wasn't impossible that David had made a quick escape that way. Deciding to check, Josh jogged back downstairs and went outside to examine the area below the window. He didn't find much, just a few scuffs in the grass, but it was enough to keep his suspicions alive. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Tommy, the neighbor's kid, riding his skateboard up and down the sidewalk. Josh waved. Hey, Tommy, how's it going? The boy skidded to a stop, grinning. Everything's fine, sir. Josh leaned in with a friendly smile. Hey, Tommy, did you see anything interesting around here today? Tommy's face lit up. Oh yes, sir. I saw a man climb out of your window like Spider-Man. He just dropped down to the ground. No problem. I want to do that someday. Josh laughed, ruffling Tommy's hair. That's impressive, Tommy. He slipped the boy a couple of dollars for ice cream, watching him scooter away, grinning. The kid's words gave Josh a jolt. It wasn't proof, but it was more than enough to keep his suspicions awake. Looking around the yard one last time, Josh's gaze fell on a small, dark object near the base of the wall. He knelt down and picked it up, a shirt button scuffed from impact. A little closer inspection confirmed it. This wasn't just any button. It was the kind that might match a nice dress shirt. Josh slipped the button into his pocket, grimacing. Of course, David could have dropped it any time, but it was all too coincidental for Josh's liking. Josh composed himself and walked back into the kitchen as Angela and David entered, carrying a large coffee and a bag of pastries. Angela's face was flushed, and David looked slightly out of breath, but they both forced smiles as they set the treats down on the counter. Here you go, Josh. Angela chirped, overly cheery. One large coffee and a croissant with custard. Just like you wanted. Thanks. Han, Josh replied, keeping his tone light as he reached for his coffee. They all sat down at the kitchen table, Josh watching David carefully as he adjusted his sleeves. That's when he saw it. The left cuff on David's shirt was missing a button. "Hey, David," Josh said with a chuckle, pretending to notice for the first time. "You lost a button there." David's face froze for a fraction of a second before he let out an awkward laugh. "Oh yeah, that must have happened at work or something. You know, I can be a bit sloppy sometimes." He forced another laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Josh laughed too, but inside his mind was racing. The missing button, the neighbor kid's story, and the hastily prepared explanations, they were all lining up in a way that made sense. But Josh wanted to come up with a plan to catch David and Angela in the act. Angela nudged Josh with her elbow. "So, what do you think? Family barbecue tomorrow." Josh forced a grin. "Sounds great." The next day, everyone gathered for a barbecue in the evening. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, amber glow over Josh's backyard. The smell of grilled meat wafted through the air as he stood by the barbecue, tongs in hand, watching David and Lisa chat across the table. Angela bustled around with a pitcher of lemonade, topping off glasses and keeping the easy flow of conversation alive. On the surface, it was a perfectly relaxed evening, the kind of gathering that friends and family shared every so often. But Josh was anything but relaxed. As he observed them, he noticed subtle tells. The way David seemed preoccupied, his eyes darting to Angela more often than to his own wife, Lisa. And then there was Lisa herself, looking elegant but slightly tense, her smile faltering whenever David turned away. Josh had suspected there might be trouble brewing between them, but he hadn't been sure until now. The opportunity Josh had been waiting for came when David excused himself to use the bathroom, and Angela headed to the kitchen for more drinks. Josh saw his moment and quietly slid into the seat across from Lisa, who was looking down at her glass, lost in thought. "Hey, Lisa," Josh said gently. "Is everything okay with you and David?" "I noticed a little tension." Lisa glanced up, a bit startled, and then gave a small, uneasy smile. "Oh, Josh," she sighed, swirling the ice in her glass. "It's nothing serious, really. Just David's been acting odd lately, and sometimes it gets under my skin. I mean, who doesn't have rough patches, right?" Josh nodded understandingly. "Of course, but if there's anything you need, or if you just want someone to talk to, I'm here." Lisa looked at him gratefully, hesitating for a moment as if deciding whether to say more. She leaned in, lowering her voice almost to a whisper. "Thank you, Josh. Sometimes I feel like he's hiding something. I'm probably being paranoid, but if he ever turns out to be cheating on me..." She paused, then let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Let's just say I'd make him regret it." Josh gave a small, sympathetic chuckle, but her words lingered in his mind, sharp and filled with an unmistakable resolve. Lisa's suspicions could be his way in, but he'd have to be careful. This conversation confirmed that he wasn't the only one who'd noticed David's strange behavior. "Thanks for being so understanding, Josh," Lisa added, squeezing his hand in gratitude. "David would never expect me to get suspicious, but I see more than he thinks." As the evening wore on, Josh kept turning Lisa's words over in his mind. She wasn't quite ready to confront David, but her instincts were sharp. If he could use her suspicions to his advantage, maybe he could draw David into a corner, one where he couldn't escape. The evening eventually wound down. The dishes cleared and goodbyes exchanged as David and Lisa headed home. Josh watched as they walked to their car, noticing how Lisa walked a few paces ahead, her face set in a determined expression. Angela gave him a playful nudge, pulling his attention back to her. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, her smile bright and innocent. Josh nodded, masking the simmering thoughts beneath his calm exterior. "Yeah, it was great. Family's important." Angela leaned in for a quick kiss, her voice soft and relaxed. "I'm glad. We should do this more often." Josh simply smiled, though inside his mind was churning. He'd had enough hints, and he knew that soon he'd have to set a plan in motion. But it couldn't be rushed. He'd need the right moment and, perhaps, a way to involve Lisa without raising too many suspicions. Over the next few days, Josh pondered his options. The decision to install hidden cameras had felt almost liberating for Josh. He'd spent days researching online, weighing options between hiring a private detective and placing cameras around the house. The cameras were cheaper and plus, he could sell them afterward. The setup was quick, and he'd installed them all while Angela was out one day, each one positioned with a perfect view of the main areas of the house. He could monitor the footage from his phone, and it gave him a strange sense of control he hadn't felt in weeks. Next, he took a short vacation from work, telling Angela that his boss had sent him on a week-long business trip. She seemed convinced, and Josh moved in with Winston, an old friend from work who was more than willing to lend him his spare room. Josh kept an eye on the cameras over the next few days, waiting for any sign of David. Angela, meanwhile, had called him several times, her voice a little too sweet, her questions a little too frequent. Josh couldn't shake the feeling that she was fishing for reassurance that he was truly gone. Then, one evening, he overheard Angela's voice through the cameras. She was talking softly, her tone laced with excitement. "David, I'm free, but I don't know. After last time, I have a bad feeling. Josh might have left for a whole week, but what if he shows up again?" Josh's heart hammered in his chest, his eyes glued to the screen. Angela continued, "Maybe we should rent a motel?" There was a pause and then her face lit up. "Lisa's leaving the day after tomorrow? Perfect. I'll come to you. Then, I'd much rather do that than some rundown motel." Josh sat back, his blood running cold. The cameras hadn't caught David in the house, but now he knew where Angela would be. His initial plan to catch them red-handed at home was crumbling. But a spark of a new plan came to him, and it involved none other than Lisa. He glanced at his watch, calculating the time. Right now Lisa has to be on her own without David. Without waiting another second, he called Lisa, his voice calm yet serious as he proposed meeting at a nearby cafe in an hour. She was just leaving work. Lisa seemed a little taken aback, even amused at the secrecy, but she agreed. An hour later, Josh met Lisa at a quiet table in the corner of the cafe. She was already seated, looking curious and slightly amused. "Josh," she began with a smile, "what's all this secrecy about? And wait, how did you know I'm going out of town the day after tomorrow?" He hesitated for a second, but decided it was best to be direct. "I know because it's part of the reason I asked to meet you. I need to talk to you about Angela and David." Her face changed instantly, the curiosity replaced by a wary confusion. "What happened to David and Angela?" "They're seeing each other, Lisa. I overheard Angela talking on the phone, making plans to meet David in your home while you're out." She stared at him in disbelief, her expression swinging from shock to anger and then to denial. Josh, that can't be right. David and we have our issues, sure. But an affair with Angela? She's my sister." Josh reached into his pocket, pulling out the shirt button he'd found in his backyard. He placed it on the table in front of her. "I found this under our bedroom window the day David and Angela were together. He must have lost it sneaking out." Lisa picked up the button, turning it over in her fingers as if trying to make it fit her world, struggling to process the enormity of it. Her hand tightened around the button, her jaw clenching. "I can't believe this," she whispered, anger and betrayal flickering in her eyes. "After all we've been through?" Josh reached across the table, his voice calm and steady. "I know this is a lot to take in, but please don't make any sudden moves. If we're going to catch them, we have to be smart about this." She looked up at him, her eyes blazing. "And how exactly do we do that?" "We catch them in the act," he replied. "If we get undeniable proof, we'll have what we need to confront them and, more importantly, what we need for the court. I want you to let me set up some cameras in your house tomorrow while David's at work. We'll watch everything together the day after, when you're supposedly gone." Lisa hesitated, her anger warring with discomfort at the thought of spying in her own home. But finally, she nodded. "All right, if they're really doing this behind our backs, I want to know every ugly detail." The next morning, Josh bought a set of cameras from a local store and headed to Lisa's house while David was at work. Carefully, he installed them. Once he was satisfied, he texted Lisa, "All set. They won't know what hit them." The following day, Lisa left the house as if heading out for the charity event and drove a few miles away before meeting up with Josh at his friend Winston's place. They sat together, keeping watch on Josh's laptop as the camera feeds flickered to life. Tension crackled in the air as they waited, both silent, bracing for what they might soon witness. As the hours ticked by, their patience was finally rewarded. The front door of Lisa's house cracked open and David's familiar figure appeared, nervously glancing around as he stepped inside. He walked through the rooms, checking each one as he went, making sure that Lisa was truly gone. Satisfied, he pulled out his phone and called Angela. Lisa went to her party, he said with a smirk. I'm waiting for you. It was already getting dark outside, the last slivers of daylight fading from the sky. About 40 minutes later, Angela arrived, her figure appearing on the screen as she walked up to the door. David greeted her with open arms, wrapping her in a cheerful hug and making a few crude gestures that made her laugh. The carefree, almost gleeful look on Angela's face was enough to set Josh's blood boiling. He glanced at Lisa beside him and saw her face tighten, a storm of anger in her eyes. The couple poured themselves a glass of wine, clinking their glasses in a mocking toast before settling in on the living room couch. They leaned in close, sharing quiet, intimate whispers and laughs. Josh and Lisa sat in silence, a tense fury simmering as they watched. Then, as Angela took a sip of her wine, a small gray cat padded over to her, brushing affectionately against her leg. Angela jumped back, letting out a startled yelp. Oh my God, those damn cats. I can't stand them. Lisa was always bringing animals home when we were kids. David, put this thing away. David chuckled, shaking his head. That's Lisa for you, the cat lady. With a grin, he scooped up the cat and carried it to the bathroom, locking the door with a careless laugh. Josh glanced over, noticing Lisa's jaw clench and her knuckles turn white as she gripped the edge of the table. Her face was tight with anger, her eyes blazing. Lisa, he asked cautiously, are you okay? She turned to him, fury in every line of her face. Those bastards, she spat, her voice low but vibrating with rage. Locking my cat and play lovers away in my own house? I'll blow their heads off. Before Josh could react, Lisa was on her feet, storming out of the room and leaving him stunned. Lisa, wait, he called, but she was already out the door, moving fast. By the time he reached the front door, she had climbed into her car and was peeling out of the driveway, her tires screeching against the pavement. Josh stood there for a moment, stunned, watching her taillights disappear into the night. This wasn't how he'd planned it. He'd wanted to confront them together to have the advantage. But Lisa's raw fury had forced his hand. Cursing under his breath, he hurried to his car and started the engine, following her back to her house. As Josh sped down the road, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He cursed himself for involving Lisa. She was far too emotional and he'd misjudged how quickly her anger could boil over. Now everything he'd carefully planned was at risk of spiraling out of control. When he pulled up to Lisa's house, the scene he found was far worse than he'd anticipated. Lisa had already burst through the front door, her movements frantic, her voice carrying outside as she hurled a string of furious curses. Josh quickly jumped out of his car, sprinting to the house just in time to hear a commotion from the second floor. Looking up, he saw Angela leaning out of an upstairs window, her face pale and filled with terror. She was wearing nothing but a bra, fumbling with one of the straps, her expression frozen as she locked eyes with Josh. Josh, her voice trembled, her gaze wild. Oh damn, is this a trap? Looks like it, Angela, Josh replied coldly, a twisted satisfaction rising within him. This trick isn't going to work twice. Angela's face crumpled in horror as she muttered, oh damn. She disappeared from the window briefly, then reappeared, shouting frantically, Josh, save me. She's going to kill us all. Before she could say another word, a hand appeared, yanking her back from the window. Angela let out a shriek, followed by a cacophony of screams, shouts, and what sounded like a scuffle. Realizing things were escalating fast, Josh raced into the house, taking the stairs two at a time, and charged into the bedroom. The scene before him was pure chaos. The first thing he noticed was a strange, eye-watering odor hanging thick in the air, something pungent and sour. His gaze snapped to the floor where David lay sprawled, clutching his side, his face a blotchy red as he sobbed, disoriented and miserable. And then there were the women. Lisa and Angela were tangled together on the floor, rolling around as they struggled against each other. Lisa's grip tight on Angela's hair. Angela was shouting, her face twisted in pain, while Lisa unleashed a barrage of expletives, her hands clawing and grasping as they grappled across the floor. Josh stood frozen in the doorway, his hand going to his head as he took in the chaotic scene. His mind raced, trying to figure out how to pull them apart or even where to start. For a second, he just watched in disbelief, uncertain whether to intervene or to let it play out. Then his eye caught something on the floor, a small canister lying near David, its label barely visible. Josh crouched down, picked it up, and squinted at the label. Pepper spray, he muttered, realizing with a grimace where the stinging smell was coming from. Checking to see if anything was left in the canister, Josh gave it a quick press. A mist sprayed directly at David's face. "Enough already," David screamed, his voice muffled as he covered his burning eyes. "God, for what? I didn't do anything." He arrived on the floor, now even more miserable than before, while Josh quickly tossed the can away. Meanwhile, Lisa and Angela continued to roll across the floor, grappling each other's hair, shrieking and spitting insults like two enraged cats. It was as if years of pent-up sibling rivalry were boiling over, with accusations and grievances flying with every twist and grab. "I always knew you were jealous of me," Lisa snarled, pulling hard at Angela's hair. Angela shot back, "Oh, give me a break. You're the one who's been smug and self-righteous since we were kids." Josh shook his head. Enough was enough. He dashed to the bathroom, grabbed a plastic bucket, filled it with cold water, and hurried back into the bedroom. Josh also gave the cat a chance to come out of the bathroom. Maybe the cat is grateful to Josh. Then, with a single swift motion, he splashed the icy water over the two women. The effect was instantaneous. Both Angela and Lisa yelped in shock, releasing each other and jumping back to opposite corners of the room, gasping and blinking as they tried to catch their breath. They sat there, soaked and shivering, glaring at each other with smudged makeup, mussed hair, and scratch marks across their arms. David, still on the floor, was attempting to wipe his face with the water now pooling across the hardwood. Josh took a deep breath, his frustration reaching a breaking point. He looked at the chaotic scene around him, the two soaked, disheveled sisters staring daggers at each other, David whimpering pathetically, and felt his patience finally snap. He shook his head, exasperation lacing his voice. "You're all completely out of your minds. Just look at yourselves. What on earth have you done?" Silence filled the room as they looked at him, wide-eyed, trying to process his words. Josh turned to Angela first, his tone sharp. "Angela, I thought I knew who I married. But seeing you sneaking around, lying to me, humiliating me with David of all people, your own sister's husband, you've shown me exactly who you are. And let me tell you, I want no part of it." Angela opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off. "You think this is all a game, don't you? Playing with people's lives, laughing and enjoying yourself while you hurt the people who actually cared about you." He then turned to David, who had managed to sit up, wiping at his swollen eyes. "And you're a coward. Sneaking around with your wife's sister, lying to her face.